welcome to this seminar about the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference and Leave No Trace. So today I really wanted to talk to you about where those two things intersect. They are pretty similar in goals, but I really wanted to talk today about how the work that the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference does helps facilitate a cleaner, more sustainable environment. So who am I? I'm Michael Sullivan. My email address is here in case you need to reach out to me for any kind of questions. I grew up in Sparta, New Jersey, in Sussex County, which is very far north as far as New Jersey goes. I went to Bard College and got a degree in English right here in Rhinebeck, where I'm at right now. I spent the past 5 years teaching in Los Angeles and South Central, and I spent the past 5 months giving back and volunteering as part of the Washburn Trail crew. So right now I'm working out of Cold Springs or Phillipstown and working on a trail crew with 6 other guys, and Tracy, who's also here on the call, and working to maintain the trails that we all know and love. Oh, I'm sorry. Is anyone else struggling with the audio besides Adrian? Okay, I'll have to, okay. I'll make sure that I'm not covering anything on my end. It might just be my internet connection. I don't have a great one where I'm at here. But if it really gets to be an issue, I might just ask Ben to take over and do the talking. But well, I built this thing by myself more or less, and I would really like to share it with you. So we'll see how it goes. Please do share out again if it becomes too distracting, and we'll see if we can do something else to fix it. So the New York Jersey Trail Conference, if you're here, I'm sure you probably already have a basic understanding of who we are and what we do. We've been around since 1920. Sorry. We've been around since 1920, and we've been protecting the trails through support and advocacy, and also educating the public like we're doing right now. So we do a lot of map making. Sorry, that's what I want to show. And this is the Avenza app that we are also connected with, making those paper maps digital. We do a lot of work on the trails. This is a picture of not me and my crew, but the invasive strike force working to clear invasive species from the trails and from our forests. Another picture of them hard at work. We also publish a lot of trail guides, so to help people get, once they're out on the trail, to know what to expect. And this is the Trail Conference building. It's a really beautiful little spot in Mahwah if you've ever seen it. It's right off the, no, I'm not going to embarrass myself trying to remember the name of the highway. If any of you know it, feel free to post it in the chat. And these are some of the parks that we take care of. As you can see, some of them are a little cut off. We take care of about 2,100 miles of trail. And I kind of wanted to, the reason I included this map is I wanted to brag a little bit. One of the reasons I got into the conference is because last summer, I started right down here. I don't know if you guys can see my pointer, down on the George Washington Bridge, and hiked up along the Long Path Trail, and then to where it connected with the Appalachian Trail, and down through the Highlands Trail, all the way back to my home in Sparta, New Jersey. I kind of had to veer off the beaten path for a minute, but I found the maps were so incredible, and the people I met who were associated with the Trail Conference helped me out so much that I really decided that I wanted to give back. And so I find myself here working on the trails. So that's kind of the Trail Conference, and I want to talk a little bit about Leave No Trace, the other side of this coin. The Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics protects the outdoors by teaching and inspiring people to enjoy it responsibly so that others might enjoy the same privilege. The center accomplishes its mission by delivering cutting-edge education and research to millions of people every year. And this year, I was able to participate in a Leave No Trace training, thanks in part due to the work of the Trail Conference. And I think it really speaks to why I got involved in the conference in general. As you know, as many of you know, if you've been outside on the trail literally ever, if people use the trail a lot, the trail tends to get ruined or destroyed or heavily impacted. And so what Leave No Trace seeks to do is educate people into how to make sure that that we are enjoying those outdoors responsibly, so that it continues to exist. So it's not just we that are able to enjoy the outdoors, but future generations as well. Oh yeah, Alana, that's pretty cool. I thought it was such an incredible training. So I'm going to try not to bore you with this because, I mean, so why? Why is this such an important thing? This is a statistic that really blew my mind. 9 out of 10 people do not know what Leave No Trace is, or really about which is not a huge problem. They don't need to know the name, but really the principles that Leave No Trace stands for. And there are 13 billion trips every single year in the United States. So 13 billion times a year, someone is getting out on a trail. And that causes significant damage, and that damage adds up. And ultimately, we on trail crews are fighting a losing battle. There's no way that we could have enough support to possibly undo all the damage that those 13 billion trips create. So the idea is, what if we can get each one of those trips to do a little less damage? Because research has shown that people who learn about these policies do change their behavior and start to minimize their impact. And so really what Leave No Trace has discovered is that by teaching and inspiring people to enjoy it responsibly, this helps protect the outdoors. And it's a huge program, reaches over 15 million Americans in dozens of countries. So it's what I really want to talk to you today about is where this policy of Leave No Trace comes back to AmeriCorps. But I do want to pause for just a second. Are there any questions so far about what I just discussed? And when I was a teacher, I would just sit and stare and wait for my students to ask. And I was sure they felt so awkward that they didn't have any questions. So I continue. You got to make it silent. So where do these paths meet? How do these sustainable trails that we as trail builders and trail maintainers help others leave no trace? So first, I just, again, wanted to do a little bit of like the background work on, oh, sorry, Adrian, I kind of missed that. They Leave No Trace as an organization sponsors a whole bunch of different seminars, and there are different levels of certification. I know that like to become a master Leave No Trace educator, you're out in the backcountry for like 5 to 7 days, and each day you are kind of going over what these principles are and how you implement them while you're in the backcountry. And there are lower grades of certification from there. But I know that in normal years, the Trail Conference does a lot of that work, and they could be able to help you set something like that up. I'm going to credit her at the very end. Heather was one of my instructors. She helped design this presentation. And so she's very familiar with this kind of protocol, and there are plenty of people here at the Trail Conference who could help you out if you were interested. So essentially, to make a trail sustainable, we're trying to minimize reconstruction and maintenance efforts, minimize the environmental impact, and maximize the quality of experience. We want trails that are durable, and because every time a trail isn't, when people have to go in to repair it, or when people use it, that trail degrades. And that degradation of the environment and the trail leads to a lot of challenges with enjoying the environment responsibly. So, for example, stable surfaces are not permanently affected by expected weather conditions and can sustain normal wear and tear from the expected uses of the area between planned maintenance. So, and they're firm, right? So this trail that we see here on the right is a really good example. It's properly sloped. It has a really decent, it looks like it's using durable material. In this case, the mineral soil that lies underneath the carpet of organic duff and leaf matter. And so it's a sustainable service really depends on where you are, but essentially what it means is that it's going to last, hopefully, tens of years. And you can kind of see here that when a trail is really stable, it minimizes that compaction, displacement, and erosion. And I love this little example of the guy with the feet. So it really shows that over time, as people wear down that same path, soil gets pushed to either side of the trail, and creating the slough and the berm. And the firmer the soil, the more sustainable the trail, the less that's going to happen, and the less maintenance is going to have to be done on that trail in the future. And so what you see here is some of the kind of work that I've been doing all season, which is bench cutting a trail. So taking away what I was talking about, that organic layer of soil that is quite spongy, retains moisture really well. It's going to move a lot when the frost heaves and things along those lines because it is organic and light and loamy, and trying to get down to that firmer mineral soil that is going to be a lot more stable, that can take a lot more of a beating as opposed to the organic duff on the top. So, and this is just a little diagram that I kind of like to talk about in terms of slope, right? So you can see here that when you have a trail that has no drainage and is, when you have a trail that has no drainage and is really flat, that's where you're going to see a lot of mud. And as I'm sure many of you, if you're experienced hikers, know, when hikers see mud, they tend to do one of these, right? So if there's a big mud puddle, they kind of cut in either direction. And what that does is increase the width of the trail and further erodes the natural environment. And the same thing kind of goes with a slope that's too steep. If it's too steep, the water is going to run down it too quickly. And even if the surface is really firm, nothing's going to hold up to a torrent of water when the spring rains come, or when the snow melt happens, or when you have one of those crazy summer storms. So really what we're looking for is not just surfaces that are stable, but also surfaces that are properly graded, that have differences in, as you can see down here, this rolling contour idea, that you have multiple changes of pitch, and none of those pitches are going to be too steep to keep the water from eroding your trail, which leads to some frustration. It's been very interesting working on the Washburn Trail. We had a lot of trails going like this, just running up the slope as quickly as possible, very breakneck ridge style. And what we're trying to design to make sure that you don't have such a steep grade, so like 1 of 10%, we're rerouting it so that the slope is a little more gentle, and then that slope can then sustain the increased load of travelers and also weather the storms better. So I don't know, I really learned to hike on the West Coast. I didn't really do a lot of that here, and all the trails look like this. But for some reason, you East Coasters just really love to run straight up the trail as quickly as you can and get to the top. And as satisfying or as enjoyable as that might be, it really makes a huge impact on the environment and the sustainability of the trails. And yeah, we're gonna get into a little bit more of that today. And the last piece I wanted to talk to you about is more work that we do on the trail crew is making sure that proper information is posted at the beginning of trails. We talked about how we at the trail conference make maps and trail guides. So when all that information is there, not only on the trailhead, but also in those guides and maps, less hikers are going to find themselves over their heads. Because as I'm sure you can imagine, if you have to helivac someone out of a pristine meadow, or you have to drive a 4-wheel truck up a path that's really only designed for ATVs, that makes a huge impact on the environment and ultimately impacts all of us. So the more we can minimize people needing to be rescued or any kind of those drastic interventions taken, we're also able to preserve the environment. And so communicating this type of information like destination and length, surface type, trail width, grade, and cross slope really helps people make an informed decision about which trails they're ready to tackle. So what I wanted to show you is some trails that need love. And I'd love to open it up for just a second. And I wanted to ask you, if you could share it in the chat, what do you think is wrong with this trail? Why do you think that people have used it in such a way that it has grown from what should be a 2-foot wide footpath to essentially a throughway? Anyone have any ideas? No, huh? Well, if you were to ask me, I would argue that, oh, here we go. Here's someone on the chat. So certainly this trail sees quite a lot of use. And Alana talked about social trails, which I was hoping would come up. Because if I'm looking at this trail, it really seems as though it's not clearly blazed. It doesn't really seem like there is an established path that everyone should follow. And that really makes that social trail a lot more tempting. There's no indication here or any blazing that says to me as the hiker, I should be bearing to the right instead of to the left. And although some of us might be able to say, oh, well, the right seems to have more wear, the left, we can see it's kind of cutting off those two grassy areas. For someone who's less experienced, that might be a lot more difficult to see. Now, what do you think might be the problem with this second trail? Sorry. So I think what I wanted to get at here with, ooh, here we go, yeah, making my teacher heart proud. As I'd mentioned earlier, going around the mud instead of through it, there's that poor drainage aspect. Right, so no one loves to hike through mud, and that is very clear. But we can do a lot of things as trail builders to avoid this kind of messy, muddy buildup. And that's kind of what I wanted to impart to us today, is that some of our work, as you can even see here, I don't know if you can see to the top right, there has been some type of work, some kind of rudimentary structure put in to help people avoid this, but as you can see, it's kind of failed. And so people have really resorted to just going wherever they want. And so a lot of the work we do as trail builders is not just ensure that things have proper drainage, but if those drainage structures are not possible, how can we help people avoid the situation entirely? What kind of structures can we put in to circumvent that? And here we go, last picture. Does anyone think they might know what is wrong with this trail or what we might need to do to improve it in order to improve its conditions? DACs. Ben, you want to explain what DACs are? I have no idea. Yeah. So, Jason. Oh, there we go. Yes, and the Adirondacks are a super popular area, but I was really pointing at the fact that this is a really steep trail, right? So like I was talking about earlier, the path has been established running up a really steep face. And you can see that maybe there was some kind of stone structure here at some point, some kind of step, but time, use, and the steepness of the slope have really torn it to pieces. And you can see this tree is sort of on a lonely island of soil that has been able to resist erosion, but the rest of it has really just washed out and resulted in a trail where people are going every which way. And I mean, me personally, it seems a little unsightly, as cool as this lovely little island is. So there are a lot of solutions to these problems, right? For the first one, where people are unclear, you can include blazes to make it a little bit easier to see which way people are going. That is work that we as trailblazers do. I think it's like, this is go straight. This one, I always like to remember, is go right, because it looks like you're leaning to the right. No one's ever said that to me out loud, but I really like that, which means that this is leaning to the left. This means the trailhead is about to begin. So this is kind of like the start line, like runners take your marks and then go. And this one is, this is the finish line, right? And this is where we're coming in. So the trail begins and ends here. And then finally, this kind of marks an offshoot. So you can go on a different direction depending on which side that third blaze is on. So we do a lot of this rudimentary blazing work, either with paint or with tags, and that helps people stay on the trail and avoid making those social trails. For those really muddy sections, we put in a lot of boardwalks. And here you see, I don't think this is us. This looks like a U.S. Forest Service type deal, but where people are putting in boardwalks to make sure that even when the ground does get muddy, we're not making the ground deeper or muddier by continuing to step on it. And then last but not least, this is actually one of my coworkers from this summer, Amaris, who is working to, you can see her using a chisel bit on this rock drill down here in order to cut down into the bedrock so we can put in 2 stairs, and that in that way kind of change the grading of the slope so that you have, instead of one really sharp slope, you have one broken by 2 stairs and then a more gradual slope going up. And then I just kind of want to show you the end results, right? So if you guys are ever on the trails and you guys are doing this work, this is what we can expect to see. You can see here, this is a section of the long path trail. You can tell by those beautiful blue blazes. And this is indicating the trail goes to the right. And so you don't see anyone deviating. You see people moving pretty much where they're supposed to, minimizing their impact and keeping to that mineral soil, that solid ground. Here you have a really beautiful section of I believe it's the Appalachian Trail as it runs into the Warwick Turnpike, which was a part of the trail I got to hike last year, which is incredible. And you have this elaborate boardwalk system to ensure that you can hike through this beautiful swampland without damaging it. And last but not least, this is a picture of the Angel's Flight Landing in Zion. One of the most heavily trafficked trails in America. It sees use of 4 every single year. But because they run these switchbacks up this incredibly steep slope, even with all that use, you're still able to provide access to everyone who wants to while maintaining the beautiful natural surroundings. That was a lot of information I threw at you all, but are there any questions about how the work we do as trail builders or as trail maintainers helps to promote sustainable, reusable trails? Okay, great. Then I also want to talk about how we trail builders act as supplemental stewards. We don't receive the same type of training, of course. Walking by means that we do have a lot of responsibilities to shoulder in terms of helping other people understand their environment and their impact on it. So this PowerPoint is really kind of designed for people who are planning to volunteer in the future or who might be considering working with AmeriCorps next year. And just some things to really check for that the stewards are taught that I think would have been really helpful for me as a trail builder to know before I went into it. So when you're looking at someone, do they look prepared? Do they seem like they know where they're going? Do they have a backpack? You have no idea how many people we see every single day with a small family or their dog and just have nothing. They don't have a water bottle, they don't have anything. And are they dressed appropriately? If these people are talking about going on a 6-mile hike, are they wearing sandals and a sundress? Are they going to be the type of person who's going to get such a bad blister or slip and twist their ankle that they're going to need some type of rescue, which again, we want to avoid in terms of sustainability. Does it look like they have a way of disposing of their waste, right? Do they know where the restrooms are? Do they have a bag for their trash? Do they have a poop bag? And these are things that you can spot pretty easily. And if you can help avoid finding those horrific little surprises on the trail from a pet owner who has neglected to bring something to dispose of. Do they know to stay on the trail? And I know this, again, if some of you are experienced hikers, it might sound ludicrous. Do they know how to follow a blaze? Can they go from point A to point B? Can they see where people are walking and follow it? But you'd be amazed at how many people, especially if you're doing a highly trafficked site, have no idea. They've never been on a trail before. And so they kind of see where they're supposed to go and they look at it as a free-for-all. Whatever way I can go, whichever way I want to go, that's the way I'm going to go. And So oftentimes I find, and we're going to get to this a little bit later, but assuming they don't know is usually a good way to go. When you're going to talk to these people about it. Do they know the significance of the environment they're in? These are oftentimes people who are tourists in the basest sense of the word. They have no idea where they are. They heard about this place through a friend of a friend, or their mom dragged them out there for some type of birthday hike. And do they feel empowered? Because you are in a role as a trail builder to actually say, hey, what you're doing right now is enjoying the work that I've done. And when you depart from the trail, you're kind of disrespecting all that hard work I've put into it. So it puts you in a pretty powerful position where these users are actually confronted with the significance of your work. It's not abstract. It's not some guy did this the other day. You are there doing the work. And so it puts you in a position to really say, hey, would you mind staying on the trail? I worked really hard to provide it for you. And then you can explain, right, why these trails are so important, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, make sure that you leave room for questions. I usually, when talking to other people on the trail, like to ask them first, like, hey, how's it going? How are you enjoying the trail today? Do you have any questions? Are you confused? And that way, it kind of feels like they're running the conversation, even though you're the one who kind of started. Because let's be honest, the agency, the people who are tasked with, who actually have real power, rangers, park officials, law enforcement, you don't see them on the trail. I don't know about you. I've only been hiking for, seriously, maybe the past 10 years. I have never once seen a ranger on a trail. Never once in my entire life. And I've certainly seen them at parks, or in campsites, kind of maintaining a campsite or a parking area, but I've never seen one out on the trail, which means that we as trail builders are oftentimes the front lines. That's me, right? Like this is the face of the authority that these people see on a day-to-day basis. So we have the authority of the resource. We are there, we understand how to use the resource, but we have no real power, right? We can't, even if we were to call a ranger up, like, hey, so-and-so is disrespecting the trail, what's the ranger gonna say? Oh, well, I'll be there in 3 hours. The chances of that person being there to face the consequences of their actions are very, very small. So what we can do is the same type of thing I did with my students as a teacher, is you kill them with kindness. And you just put on a facade of such warmth and energy and kindness that they can't help but feel as though if they do not do as you ask them to do, that they're being kind of rude. And here are like some step-by-step things that will really show some results in confronting people who might not be using the trails in the most sustainable way. So first and foremost is to give the person the benefit of the doubt. This year, I literally watched a woman duck under the caution tape we had strung up to protect an unfinished section of trail. And when I confronted her and said, hi, miss, I'm so sorry, the trail is closed, she turned and looked at me and said, well, I'm sorry, it just wasn't clearly marked. Like, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to be here. And so I could have come from this place of, yeah, well, I just watched you touch the caution tape, and so I'm pretty sure it was clearly marked enough. Or I could say, well, that might be true. I really apologize, but this section is closed off for a good reason. It's dangerous for you to be here, and here's the way out, right? These people oftentimes don't know that they're doing anything bad to them. They're oftentimes in survival mode. These are people who may not have hiked before and might be out of shape. And so I'm sure you know the feeling of, you're climbing up that last summit, you've been hiking all day and you're about to get to your car. You get sloppy, right? You're not stepping as carefully. You might be taking those social paths that cut off sections of a trail. And so you really have to put yourself in that person's shoes and say, this person might not be a jerk. This person might just be exhausted. This person might be suffering from fatigue. This person is also probably pretty embarrassed and so likely to lash out. So you just be calm and polite and pretend as though you didn't see them cross the caution tape, or you didn't see them encourage their dog to like poop in the middle of the trail, right? You just say, hey, you know what happens when people do this. And then another really important thing is to build rapport. So I find my best conversations go when I start the conversation like hey, I love that. I have the same Eddie Bauer rain jacket, or I love those shoes. I mean, you know, trail people, you can get them to talk about their gear endlessly, and it's a really easy way to ingratiate yourself with them. Another easy way to do that is talking about their destination. Hey, where are you coming from? Where are you going? Oh, wow, that's such a cool site. I hiked that trail. You've had these conversations on the trail. They're really easy to strike up. And for the most part, people are really amenable to them. And so when you kind of start that way and introduce yourself, explain what it is you're doing on the trail, instead of jumping the gun and saying, hey, do you know you're being a jerk? Again, the chances of them changing their behavior skyrocket, because when you start off with the attack, they immediately come on the defensive. And again, the same with students, the same with adults. They might do the wrong thing just to spite you. So that kindness can be a really powerful thing. Another really important thing that I never thought of is to try not to confront someone eye to eye. It's a confrontational thing. When I stare directly into the camera, directly into what I presume are your eyes, I can read as aggressive, especially if I'm just standing here reading, right? But if I'm standing next to you and I'm kind of glancing over and explaining myself to the words and then turning back to you and checking your response, it's a lot more casual. And these people are less likely to bristle and then do the quote-unquote wrong thing. Something Ben actually talked about too, he probably knows, he wears a lot of sunglasses and I don't, is that you don't want to do the cop thing, right? You don't want to be wearing those shades when you roll down the window in order to preserve some type of, keep up a wall. Like, take your glasses off. It's what you do if you walked inside and you were talking to your in-laws or your girlfriend's parents or your boyfriend's parents. And so give the people on the trail the same type of courtesy. And then something I learned as a teacher is that you don't want to call people out, right? So it might seem like a lot of effort, but if someone is 200 yards away or 100 yards away or even 50 yards away, you don't want to scream, excuse me, miss, what the hell do you think you're doing? Instead, you want to go up and approach them. You want to say, hi, I'm so sorry to bother you, but did you know that? Because when you make it a public affair, when you are confronting someone in front of a group, if you're on a crowded trail, all of a sudden, that person has to save face, right? You've just publicly humiliated them. Hey, you're doing something wrong, knock it off. That person is not going to think, oh boy, well, that's sunlight, right? Oh, wow, let me stop. Oftentimes what they're going to think is, who's that jerk over there telling me what to do? I'm going to do what I want to do. I don't care what he says. And what's more, I'm going to show everyone around me that I'm the boss of me, not him, right? So if you can make the schlep 50, 100, 200 yards in order to have that conversation face to face, you're not coming at them in terms of, you're not trying to confront them or embarrass them. Instead, you're trying to educate them, which kind of leads to my fourth point, right? About why are you asking them to do this? You can't just say, hey, moron, get off the trail. So much more effective is, hi, do you know that when you, my favorite thing is to point it out. Do you see all those desire trails over there? Isn't that kind of ugly? When you take those trails, you're actually reinforcing them and make it harder for us as a trail crew to reinvigorate the environment, right? And so when you can explain, this is what you're doing wrong and why it affects you, your children, the other people on the trail, me, the community at large, again, now they're learning, they're not being chastised. And then, especially if you're working on a trail, try to be a trail that you know, right? Because you might be able to share more details. Like on my trail, we are working right next to a huge quarry. And so when people want to go and like play on the edge and dangle their toes and take their great Instagram selfies, you can come up and politely say, you know, this was an active quarry, and which means that the stone you're standing on is unstable, and there's a 500-foot drop below you, and you're not going to survive. So could you just take like 3 steps this way, and you can still get that same selfie? It could be really fun, and you're less likely to die a horrible, gruesome death that I would have to scrape you off the bottom of the quarry for. So, and that's the next step, right? Give them an alternative. Oh, well, there's a viewing platform that me and my group built just 50 yards up the way. It's a lot safer if you want to stand there and take a look at the view. I would really recommend it. Or instead of hiking along this social path, if you're really tired, why don't you have a seat? Take a breath, take in the view. Because when you can provide them with that alternate behavior, you're not just saying, hey, you're wrong, stop it. You're saying, there's a better way of doing it. Don't you want to do it the better way? It's the same message, it's the same idea, just delivered with a better spin. And honestly, you're more likely to get people to do what you ultimately want. Who doesn't want to do that, right? So do I have any questions about our roles as trail builders and also those stewards when time to time? Yeah, Adrian, I don't know what to do. I really apologize. This is the only kind of setup I've got. I'm assuming that the problem is pervasive, that everyone else is struggling with it as well. Ben, do you think I should hand it over? Like this, unfortunately, there's really nothing I can do or I might be able to set it up on my phone. The audio is coming in on my phone, maybe? Yeah, but here's hoping, Adrian. I do apologize. Where I am stationed on the Washburn Trail near Breakneck Bridge. Oh man, we had that really 2 or 3 weekends ago where we had that really beautiful burst of weather. We had more than 2,000 hikers on the trail on a single Saturday. So, CT, to answer your question, where we are at, all of those 2,000 people pass right by our work site. And so we see quite a few people on any given day, especially when the weather's nice. So it really depends on your trail, but like I had friends who were working in Sterling on a pretty more or less deserted section. But again, like each one of those people you can stop and you educate, the better. So I got one last section for you, unless there are any other questions. Okay, great. So the last kind of component I want to talk about is how we as trail builders can do better. We're already doing all this incredible work to leave no trace and to help others do the same. But oftentimes, especially if you're working on a site for an extended period of time, we get fatigued, right? We start to treat it not as this beautiful natural environment, but as a construction site. And I don't know if any of you have ever worked or been at a construction site, but it gets ugly fast. So I just kind of wanted to buzz through how some of these leave no trace principles can also be applied to trail builders themselves. The first and really important thing is staying on the trail. It's really tempting, especially when you have been schlepping rocks uphill for 8 hours and it's time to pack up and you have to bring these really heavy pieces of equipment back to the job box and get everything stored, right? But one way we can do that is not only staying on the trails that are already established, but talking about work trails. So how can we, just like those previous principles, staying on one track instead of having people branch out and take 18 different shortcuts to get to where they're trying to go? So by establishing these work trails, these like more direct routes, back and forth from highly frequented spots, we can help to focus the impact. And yeah, for sure, those word trails are going to look like trash by the end of the season. However, if when we start doing the restoration efforts, that's a lot less work to restore just one strip of trail than it is to restore 8 different trails that are all leading to the same place. Because as a trail builder and as a volunteer, what you really have to think about is, sure, you might be able to save yourself 30 seconds, 50 feet by cutting a section of the trail. But then you have to remember how much time that's gonna require on the back end. So you're gonna wrap it all up, and all those shortcuts are gonna lead to a huge amount of work, refertilizing the soil, loosening it from its impacted state, killing all the vegetation and transplanting them back to where they're supposed to go. Just trying to keep that in mind, right? And if you do have to leave the trail, you can protect vegetation by stepping on rocks or more durable surfaces. So if you can, imagine like you're skipping along through a stream, right? And the forest floor, or like kids playing lava, right? If you can manage to stay on top of the stonework or on logs or on more durable surface rather than trampling on ferns or like running up a steep bank, then you're going to, even when you do have to cheat, because you will have to cheat, there's no way to avoid damaging the surrounding environment when you're doing this kind of work. It's going to be less impactful, right? And you can feel better about the work that you're doing and better about the impact you're leaving on the trail. And we talked about this earlier, so I'm going to kind of skip through this a little bit. Like that rock, sand, and gravel, these are super durable surfaces. This is where you definitely want to stay if at all possible. Ice and snow, I mean, we're getting into that season, are also really great at kind of minimizing the impact on the layers below. Snow will kind of absorb the impact, and ice is really solid, so it won't compress the soil quite as much or even damage the vegetation beneath. But it's also important to note that not all vegetation is created equal, right? So dry grasses are much more resistant to trampling than, let's say, a fern or a flower. I mean, when we grow grass in our yards, we don't grow ferns to cover the ground, because if we had little kids or running around and playing baseball or trampling every surface on the yard that was covered in ferns, your yard would be a bare patch of dirt in no time. So if you can also look for grasses, because they tend to handle the trampling better. You also want to watch out for anything wet. Wet meadows especially are super, super fragile ecosystems when it comes down to handling tread. So you got to be careful, because each time you go off trail, it's going to encourage new travelers to take that same route, right? Which is the exact opposite of what we're trying to do. We're trying to focus the use. We're trying to bring people in and make sure they're only damaging one specific part, not taking all these desired trails. So if we can avoid making the desired trails ourselves, we're kind of being doubly effective. And just watch out for those steep slopes too. Like I showed you earlier, it gets really ugly when those trails are trying to cut up slopes that are just too steep for it to be handled. Yeah, so obviously you want to step on the gravel. If you got to step on grass, that's usually fine as long as you don't make a habit of it, but you want to avoid the delicate plants. Disposing of waste is also really important. So you, on a work site, create a lot of trash. But as a trail crew, as someone who's working on a trail crew, there are things you can do to minimize this. So you can pick up your trash. I know I always carry a trash bag so that if I find other trash on the trail, I can pick it up and bring it out. And then what I do is I even use, like, some of my coworkers will bring stuff in single-use plastic bags or saran wrap, which is ultimately, that stuff's filling a landfill anyways. So it's possible to use something that's more reusable. It is a little bit more weight, but at the end of the day, you're only hiking like half a mile, and a couple of ounces over the course of a short distance is really not going to break you. And this is something that I find really interesting is that even biodegradables, I know like I see orange peels all the time on the trail, but those take like, especially banana peels. I think banana peels take something like, now I'm not going to speak out of my butt. An exceedingly long time to degrade in the wild, and nothing's going to eat a banana peel. Nothing eats orange peels. They're rinds, they're waste. And harm the native wildlife. I don't know if you guys have heard of like pigeons exploding because they eat all like uncooked rice that people throw away for wedding ceremonies, and it expands in their stomach, and poor things, they just die because their stomachs burst. And there are all kinds of impacts that we really can't foresee unless you're a very experienced naturalist. And I don't mean hiker, I mean naturalist, someone who studied this in college. So you just gotta be careful. And it really should be a pack in, pack out type situation. So as mundane or as silly as it is or might seem, you really gotta try to take that food with you. Yeah, and thank you, Alana. I was actually gonna mention that because I hiked Angel's Flight in Zion, and the chipmunks and squirrels are so accustomed to people, they will come up to you and sit on your boots and wait for you to feed them. And it's not only one, is it like a little creepy, like God knows what kind of disease these animals are carrying, right? That might be totally harmless to them, but could be really harmful to you. But sometimes, like, I remember they had all kinds of pictures posted in Zion itself of like bleeding fingers because these are wild animals, even if they are really accustomed to people. And that's not even talking about like bears, which can actually be dangerous, right? So you really don't want to habituate these animals. You don't want to disrupt the environment. And so it might seem a little icky to keep that apple core with you for the entire hike. But if it means that those trails are going to be around in the future, I think it's kind of worth the sacrifice. And then obviously pick up your waste. Like animal waste is absolutely disgusting. There are two piles. I know exactly where there are. There are two piles of it sitting right on the trail on the way up to our work site this year. And every time I see it, that's an eyesore, right? So, come on, you wouldn't do that in your own neighborhood, or maybe you would. Maybe you're just a trashy person. But I don't think I'm talking to any of those people here. Fingers crossed, right? And then make sure you plan ahead. I always when I'm working, I carry a lot of extra food and water because, oh my God, I remember one time there was a woman who was walking her pit bull and she was finishing this 4-mile hike, and we heard this poor creature. It must have been a quarter mile away. It's breathing, just panting uncontrollably. And this woman got to us and, hi, do you have any extra water for my dog? I didn't bring any water for him. It's 90 degrees outside, and I don't know, he doesn't sound great. And we're like, lady, this is how dogs die. This is how really tragic things happen. My friend of mine lost his dog to heat stroke. And so thank God for her, we were sitting there and I had an extra liter of water with me, a liter I keep just in case. And I know there's an argument to be made about kind of facilitating this, like, oh, let her learn her lesson. But I mean, come on, I'm not gonna let that dog suffer. Like, I'm not gonna let these people suffer, because ultimately I like to think that they've suffered enough and that maybe next time they might actually bring back. Maybe next time they might actually bring food, because it's a scary thing to feel like you're lost. It's a scary thing to feel like you're not gonna have enough water to get you back to your car. So I don't know. And again, it avoids those like rescues, which are really damaging to the trails. So I don't know. If you can, if you're strong enough, if you're able, bring that extra food and water, because you never know who's going to need it. And then, just really thinking about like the forecast and the terrain. I talk about the terrain especially, and like first aid materials, because this was probably the first month or so. One of our guys was walking down in the rain. We were packing up for the day. He fell and dislocated his shoulder, right? And I was the only person in our crew of 8 people who was carrying a first aid kit, who had a triangle bandage and Tylenol for him to take. And yeah, we were able to call. And so because I was prepared, not just for myself, but for others, we were able to get him to the junction of the trail where he could easily be picked up by a truck and then get him down to the ambulance. And sure, his life wasn't in danger. It's not like you're going to die from a dislocated shoulder, but he was in a lot of pain. And because I was prepared, we avoided having to use a helivac. We avoided having, like, or him just being in excruciating pain, right? So we, as people who are more experienced on these trails, people who are giving back and are really getting deeply involved with the trail work, we do have to kind of step up. So I'm just, yeah, for sure, map and compass. It's something that is a little less daunting than you'd think. I'll get there at the end. We'll have time for questions. I don't want to keep everyone if people have other plans. And also, minimize alterations and leave what you find. This is a picture of my coworker, John, a really lovely guy. This is the bottom of the quarry, and someone went to pick up his helmet at the end of the day. He had left it, and they fumbled it and just went off right off the edge. And so this is me taking a picture of him, and he's found it, right? And we work really hard to leave things the way that they were when we came in. So, you're not making tables. We've been there for 5 months, right? So as tempting as it is to make a table to eat lunch at every day, don't. It's just a structure you're going to have to break down. Try to leave the surfaces the way you found them. And one of my favorite tips is a landscaping trick. If you're disposing of brush off the trail, you don't leave the cut ends facing the trails. You have them face away, because those cut ends scream, people have been here, and that's not usually why people are out there in the first place. And then, like when you're building up facilities, you do have to dismantle them. And especially and then even going so far as to look at the way you've been cutting the stone and trying to mask those effects, because people go into the woods not to be around people or to be around the memory of society or people that you've been around. They want to be in nature. And so the more you can do to facilitate that process, to make sure that those trails stay natural, even if it's only natural seeming, I don't know, the better these trails are for us and for the future. And that also kind of goes into trying not to hurt the plants, and to disrupt because you can, and in ways that you might never really expect, right? If you're leaning tools on trees or being a little sloppy with some of the cables you're using to draw rocks upslope, you're going to leave these really egregious marks on trees and might even go so far as to hurt them if they're young or if they're sickly. Obviously, don't carve your initials into the tree. I think it's kind of tempting, right? We all think, especially when you put so much time into these trails, like, oh, I own them, I deserve to leave my mark. No, you don't. You're a volunteer. You're doing this for other people, and I cannot wait to take my kids up to my section of trail, presuming it's still there, and say, oh, well, when I was your age, I was laying stone and blah, 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 blah. But I can do that myself. I don't need to leave initials to prove that it's true. Be careful with surviving vegetation. You get really hungry doing that kind of work. So we have up on our section of the trail, we have a lot of wild blueberries that are growing. But if we eat them all, then that doesn't leave any for the birds or for the bears or for any of the animals that really depend on them. You can eat wineberries instead. They're invasive, so you can eat as many as you want. At least that's the rule we played by. Yeah, and also, if you're digging huge holes, don't leave them. People don't want to look like people don't want to look and see mass graves everywhere or the cratered surface of Mars. You really want to try as much as you can to make it look like these stairs appeared out of nowhere. Or, wow, this trail leads perfectly along this slope. I wonder who did it. You really don't want them to scream people were here. And that ladies and gentlemen, is kind of the end of my presentation. I got some like credits to go through because I did not do this alone. But do I have any questions about anything I've gone over in this last section, or even anything, any other follow-up questions that you have? I'd love to hear your voices if you want to cue in, if you want to chime in, if you're comfortable that way. Otherwise, I can continue reading the chat. Thank you, Rudy. I appreciate it. Yeah, there definitely is a navigation webinar. I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
I was just going to add a couple of things, Michael, if that's possible. Hi, everyone. I'm Ben. It's worth kind of like circling back and just emphasizing that the work that trail construction crews do, like not just clipping and blazing and cleanup, but the actual high impact power tools type thing. It seems kind of at odds with leave no trace, and it's not leave no trace. It's leave less trace. We only impact as much as is necessary to make that trail a durable surface that we can then hopefully convince people to stay on instead of impacting the areas surrounding it. So that trail is a bit of a sacrificial zone of impact to try and protect everything else. In case anyone was wondering about the disconnect between chiseling into bedrock and talking about leave no trace, they seem opposite sides of the coin, and they kind of are, but it is very much related. So again, make the surface durable to try and get the water off and keep the people on, so that they are willing to actually accept those leave no trace principles and behave the way you'd like them to. Hopefully that helps frame it. That's it.
Any other questions for me or for Ben? Okay, well, that took almost exactly an hour, which was my plan. I'm really glad to hear that. If you have any questions, you can find me at the opposite low on Instagram. You have my email address from the beginning and the end of the presentation. And then I did want to say, like, thanks to Slides Carnival, it helped me design this presentation. And then Peter Dolan, who the trail program manager, who contributed, and Heather Darley, the communication assistant I mentioned earlier. They contributed a lot of the material that I definitely just plagiarized, copied and pasted right into here. They've done some really incredible work, and I couldn't have done this without them. And also, I do want to say thank you to Ben. He has been really instrumental every step of the way, kind of double checking my work and giving me suggestions for how I might direct the course of the presentation. So I do want to say thank you to all three of these people, as well as Slides Carnival, and help me design the slides. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. Unless there are any other questions, I really hope that you guys have a great night. And thank you so much for coming to the webinar. I hope to see you out on the trails next year.
Bye, everyone.